Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, July 10th, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I will be chairing this committee. We are joined by Committee Vice Chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Katie Tang. I want to thank Jim Smith and Ben English from SFGTP for covering this meeting, as well as Erica Major, the clerk of our committee. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as a part of a file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the July 18th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, would you call item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is a resolution adopting findings under the California Environmental Quality Act related to modifications to the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission Water System Improvement Program and the San Andreas Pipeline number 2 replacement project.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we have our PUC to speak on this item. Welcome.
Kath, I'm the Assistant General Manager of Infrastructure for the SFPUC. The San Andreas Pipeline number 2 is a 54-inch diameter pipeline constructed in 1928, which runs from Harry Tracy Treatment Plant at the border of San Bruno and Millbrae to Sunset Reservoir in San Francisco. This pipeline provides important redundancy to the regional water supply system. Over 3,700 feet of the pipeline was replaced at critical locations in Colma, South San Francisco, San Bruno, and Millbrae to improve seismic reliability as part of the Peninsula Pipeline's seismic upgrade under the Water System Improvement Program. These locations were selected to be replaced based on known seismic hazards, such as locations where the pipeline crosses earthquake faults and zones where liquefaction could occur in a major earthquake. However, in July 2015, a portion of the 54-inch San Andreas Pipeline number 2 that was not replaced as part of the seismic reliability upgrade failed in Juniper Serra County Park in San Mateo County, resulting in the loss of millions of gallons of water. This portion of pipeline was replaced, but upon further inspection, it was discovered that major portions of the pipeline were severely corroded and deteriorated. Therefore, this new San Andreas Pipeline 2 project will replace and rehabilitate approximately 6,500 feet of San Andreas Pipeline number 2 in 4 segments in San Bruno and increase the reliability of the water supply. In 2016, the Board of Supervisors appropriated funds via ordinance for this new pipeline replacement work. The original EIR for the Peninsula Pipeline Seismic Upgrade Project was adopted by the Planning Commission on October 17, 2013. Findings from the original EIR indicate that some impacts would be significant, with others being less than significant with mitigation. The Planning Department issued an EIR addendum in April 2017 for the additional work planned to be performed under the San Andreas Pipeline 2 project. The Planning Department finds that the additional work would not result in new or more severe impacts as defined by CEQA. The SFPUC Commission subsequently adopted a resolution to approve the repairs to the pipeline and adopt the CEQA findings. We respectfully ask the Board of Supervisors to adopt the addendum's CEQA findings, including that the addendum is sufficient for the Board to make its decision to adopt findings and that no major revisions are needed in the final EIR, and that the clerk of the board will notify the controller of the board's actions. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, do we have any questions at this time? Seeing none, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 1? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, any further questions or comments? Motion?
I'll make a motion to send forth item 1 to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 2?
Yes, item number 2 is a resolution approving the jurisdictional transfer of approximately 17 acres of city-owned real property comprised of portions of the assessor's block, numbers 4297 through 4300, 4310, and 4313.
Okay, thank you very much. We have MTA to speak on this item. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors. Jason Gallegos, SFMTA, Manager of Real Estate Services. Today I'm here to complete a 16-year MOU between the San Francisco Public Utility, San Francisco Port, and the SFMTA. In 2001, the SF Port and SFMTA entered into a MOU which granted to the SFMTA the ability to use in perpetuity their land, port land at Illinois, Cesar Chavez, Maryland, and 25th Street to design and build our Muni Metro East facility, which went into existence and became operational in 2008. So today, as you know, it is a requirement to come to the board and to seek approval of any departmental jurisdictional transfers of property. And so we are here today to finalize the last component or last deliverable, if you will, of that MOU between the SF Port and MTA, and seek your approval of such an action. We paid the port $25.7 million in 2001 for this transfer fee or transfer use of this future property for the SFMTA, and we also granted the port an additional $4 million to design and construct part of the Illinois Street Bridge. So with that, we're just here really completing something that has been on the books for a long time, and we'd like to close out this MOU between the port and finalize this jurisdictional transfer between the city and the SF Port.
Okay. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. I just wanted to note, pursuant to the changes that the board voted relative to Chapter 23 of the Administrative Code, wherein we required appraisals of property, be it for jurisdictional transfers or sale, that as set forth in the recitals in this resolution, insofar as the transfer price was paid, as Mr. Gallego stated, in 2001 and predates that change to the Administrative Code, the appraisal requirement is not triggered here today, and I just wanted to say that for the record because there will be some others coming up where departments do not want to do appraisals for jurisdictional transfers. So
That's
for those of you who are watching from those departments.
Yes.
And by the way, even if there are transfers between enterprise agencies without consideration, I think the public has a right to know what the value of that transfer. So if it goes, for instance, from, I'm making this up, the PUC to the MTA or vice versa, you have two enterprise agencies, I think the public has a right to know. But this predates it by 16 years, so I am fine with it.
Yes, and also in that respect, just to bring a little more clarity, the transfer price was based on a fair market value analysis and an appraisal. So, in the spirit of the current, as code, if you will, it sort of falls in that line.
Right, and the consideration was paid at that time of the appraisal. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not calling for a new appraisal as of the date of transfer. The purchase price or the transfer price was paid as of the date of the appraisal in 2001.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Supervisor Peskin, and for that warning to all the other departments about to come through the pike. With that, seeing no other questions, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 2? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, can I entertain a motion on item number 2?
So moved with recommendation
I think that's a motion by Supervisor Peskin to move item number 2 forward with positive recommendation, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 3?
Yes, item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to revise the amount of the inclusion. Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow residential uses of the uses and child care facility uses to share required open space, make child care facilities principally permitted in all zoning districts except the production, distribution, and repair and industrial zoning districts where they would be conditionally permitted.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, we are joined by Supervisor Yee, who is a sponsor of this item, so I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and then hello to my other fellow supervisors, Supervisor Tang and Peskin. There's no surprise that we are facing a child care shortage in San Francisco. Currently, we have 2,630 infants and toddlers on the waiting list for affordable child care. As you know, reliable quality childcare is essential for parents and guardians who want to pursue education and employment opportunities. It is also critical for the growth and development of infants and toddlers ages 0 to 5. As featured in the San Francisco Chronicle recently, childcare providers already face a number of challenges in this difficult market. State investments fluctuate, resulting in less wages for childcare workers. The cost of doing business gets astronomically more expensive every year. It is also increasingly more difficult for childcare centers to find affordable space to rent or own. Even if a provider could find an affordable space for a center, they have to go to great lengths to improve the facilities to meet all state safety and open space requirements. And of course, on top of all these state requirements, we also have local zoning requirements that add additional costs and time that can be arduous and for nonprofit childcare organizations. The legislation before you today would make childcare facilities principally permitted in all zoning districts, with a few exceptions in production, distribution, and repair areas. We have also heard from many residential developers that they find it challenging to support a childcare center on their properties because of the additional open space requirements. This ordinance would help to alleviate this problem by allowing residential developments to use existing minimum open space requirements to meet childcare's open space requirements during weekday business hours. The space would still meet all state licensing requirements. In order for our city to be family-friendly for the social, cultural, and economic fabric of our growing community, it is imperative that we must invest and support access to high-quality childcare. I want to extend my appreciation to the Planning Department staff for their work on this legislation, the Office of Early Care and Education, and our provider network that has offered feedback throughout this process. We need to make it easier for providers to operate here so that they can continue serving families in every neighborhood. I also want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisors Katie Tang and Supervisor Hillary Ronan, for their support. I believe now Sheila Nicolopoulos from the Planning Department is here to make a presentation.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm Sheila Nicolopoulos with the Planning Department. So the legislation for your consideration today, sponsored by Supervisors Yee, Tang, and Ronan, proposes changes to the regulation of child care facilities in the Planning Code. On May 18th, the Planning Commission unanimously approved this ordinance, and all public comment heard, the Planning Commission was in favor. I also want to acknowledge Commissioner Johnson, who helped spearhead this work. So I'll give you a brief overview of child care and go into some of the specifics of this proposed legislation. So there's two types of, can I get the presentation? There are two types of childcare.
Ma'am, you're welcome to speak from that microphone right there.
Okay, there we go.
And then flick through it.
So we have two types of childcare in San Francisco. We have childcare, family childcare, which is for up to 14 children in a provider's home, although enrollment is usually closer to 8 kids. Childcare centers serve more than 14 children. And both of these categories of childcare are licensed and regulated by the Community Care Licensing Division of the California Department of Social Services. The process of opening a small family childcare for up to 8 children in a private home is relatively easy, but the current process for creating a new childcare facilities for more than 8 kids is complex. It involves approvals from at least 7 state and local agencies, and it can take anywhere from 9 months to several years to open a childcare. And I've outlined here broadly some of the steps that are involved. So the proposed legislation for your consideration today would simplify the steps in this process that involve the Planning Department and the Planning Code. These numbers illustrate the dire need for childcare in San Francisco. There are 23,000 children ages 0 to 2 in San Francisco, but only 3,400 childcare spots for them. So there are only enough childcare spots for 15% of our youngest population. In addition, wait lists are long. As of January of this year, there were at least 2,400 families waiting to get into childcare. And these numbers are likely underreported as they capture those families who have signed up for wait lists, but not ones who have been unable to get on a full wait list, have decided to get a nanny, adjust their work schedules, leave work completely, or rely on extended family for childcare. Clearly, we need to increase childcare capacity, but what these numbers don't show are the numerous factors impacting childcare decisions. Parents looking for childcare must consider cost, hours of operation, annual schedule, because some childcare is closed in the summer, programming, language, meals offered, and ages accepted. Any parent will tell you that finding childcare that fits their family's needs is difficult. And with limited care options, families face difficult decisions about remaining in the workforce or even remaining in San Francisco. So there are 4 areas of the Planning Code that create challenges for childcare facilities. First, the Planning Code has 5 definitions of childcare. Some of these, such as those in Article 7, conflict with the state's definitions of childcare. Second, the planning approval process can take an additional 8 to 18 months when conditional use authorization is required. The uncertainty of timing makes it difficult for providers to commit to families that need care for their children. In the past 2.5 years, since the beginning of 2015, the Planning Department has processed 19 childcare cases that required conditional use. Third, at least $2,000 in additional costs comes with neighborhood notification process and conditional use fees. Childcare is not a lucrative business, and the providers are often nonprofits, so these fees can be a significant burden. And lastly, as Supervisor Yee mentioned, the code requires that mixed-use developments meet residential open space requirements and additional open space requirements for childcare. This is often only feasible when a new development includes childcare prior to building and incorporates it into their design. Even if an existing mixed-use building has the perfect outdoor-indoor space for childcare, under our existing requirements, they won't meet the state's open space requirements. This makes it very difficult or entirely unfeasible for new childcare to locate into existing buildings. So we have 4 proposed changes to the Planning Code. One is we would have 1 definition of childcare instead of 5 in Section 102. This definition refers to and is consistent with the state definition of childcare facility. Second, given the need, childcare facilities would be principally permitted except in 5 zones: PDR 1B, PDR 1G, PDR 2, M1, and M2. By requiring conditional use in residential zoning, childcare undergoes the same level of scrutiny as hospitals, churches, and mortuaries. Third, the ordinance would exempt childcare facilities from neighborhood notification requirements. Community engagement is important, especially for larger childcare facilities that often serve as community centers, and this engagement will continue to happen with the support of the city's Office of Early Care and Education. Lastly, the ordinance would allow childcare and residential to share open space in mixed-use developments. This would be limited to Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. A childcare facility would not be able to use more than 50% of a single shared space. Any space used by childcare would still be subject to state licensing, fire, and building code requirements. The space would be designed for childcare during set weekday hours and then open to residents the rest of the time. Neighborhood concerns about childcare usually focus on 2 things: noise and traffic. And we believe that both of these are sufficiently addressed through existing processes that would not be affected by the proposed changes to the Planning Code. Currently, noise is addressed through the environmental review process and would continue to be. And traffic is also addressed through environmental review. Drop-off and pickup management plans are required for any childcare facility or school with more than 20 students. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Supervisor Yee, for your ongoing support for families in San Francisco. In addition to planning staff from the Office of Early Care and Education and the Low Income Investment Fund are here and able to answer questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions from the committee? See none. I'd like to call up Graham Dotson from Office of ECE, I think, and Candace Wong. Would you also like to make some comments from LIFT? And you come on up right after him.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Graham Dobson from the Office of Early Care and Education. We strongly support the proposed changes to the planning codes. We think that San Francisco can play an essential role in either encouraging or discouraging the development of new ECE facilities. And by making the process as simplified and as streamlined as possible without additional burdens and challenges for providers to go through, would really help increase the capacity of slots for young children in San Francisco. So we're very excited to see this move forward. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Candace Wong. I'm the director of the Child Care Facilities Fund with the Low Income Investment Fund. For the last decade, the Low Income Investment Fund, or more than the last decade, last 2 decades, the Low Income Investment Fund has been working with the city around developing quality child care facilities in the city. And this is a really well thought out piece of legislation. Thank you to Supervisor Yee's office, Supervisor Tang, and Supervisor Ronan's office for authoring this legislation. And thank you to the Office of EC and Planning for and engaging the community and getting a lot of input in creating such a thorough piece of legislation. I think this is good government. I think there is often, these delays have made projects impossible to move forward, meaning every day there's delays in projects, and delays in projects that actually never happen is a day that a child is not receiving quality early care and education services in the city. In addition, I think with these efficiencies and be able to move these projects forward, I think it'll basically make it more nonprofits to be able to expand childcare facilities and be able to move forward with projects. I think it's also a twofer. It's a positive for both housing, maximizing housing units, as well as being able to use shared open space so that we can use the space that we have available in the city more efficiently. So I really support this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Wong. Any other public comments? Come on up and just line up on to my left.
Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Lena O'Malley, and I'm here as a representative of Compass Family Services, and we are enthusiastic supporters of this proposed ordinance to amend the planning code to allow for more child care facilities. We wholeheartedly believe this ordinance will make a tangible, positive difference in the lives of the families we serve, and we serve about 5,000 San Francisco families every year, many of whom are only able to reach true economic self-sufficiency with the availability of child care services. Given the tremendous lack of child care for families in general that Supervisor Yee mentioned, the situation is even more dire for the families experiencing homelessness that we serve. And we believe this proposed ordinance, which will amend the planning code to allow for more child care facilities in most zoning districts and would streamline the definition of child care, would change the landscape significantly. It would increase not only access but capacity for childcare throughout the entirety of the city. So we're incredibly supportive of this next step for our families, and we hope that the board gives the ordinance thoughtful and thorough consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Christina Meloenda, and I'm the Executive Director of Mission Kids. First, I'd like to thank the supervisors for considering this important legislation that will help address the shortage of childcare in San Francisco by making it easier to find space for childcare facilities. Mission Kids is a city-funded childcare facility serving low and moderate income families of the Mission District and the city at large. Mission Kids has received a certificate of honor from Mayor Ed Lee for its dedication to serving low-income families, and was one of the first city-funded programs to receive the highest possible rating on the industry standard quality scale. Over 4 years ago, we reached out to our city partners to let them know that we were turning away dozens of families each admission cycle. We had robust administrative and teaching capacity and were ready to expand to meet the overwhelming demand for childcare. After an extensive facility search, we realized we would need support in identifying a viable space that could meet all the requirements for childcare, including ample outdoor space. Considering the extremely limited supply of potential properties and competitive real estate market prices, especially in the Mission, this would be no easy task. 4 years later, we are continuing that search now with even greater urgency as we are currently facing eviction from our current leased space. We have contacted every supervisor, reached out to every public housing developer, and connected with all our city partners in hopes of identifying a viable space to sustain and expand our program. With all these efforts, including a year of city-funded consultants to facilitate our search, we have yet to successfully identify a space. It is a dream and a vision for Mission Kids to own its own facility so that we can continue to provide this essential service without recurring fear of eviction and displacement. This legislation would greatly alleviate the cost and risk of creating new childcare facilities. We appreciate that the legislation will enable childcare to share residential outdoor space, as this may open new possibilities, especially given the shortage of outdoor commercial space. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, and thank you for your time on this important issue. My name is Katie Skoog. By day, I'm the executive director of TIBA Foundation, an organization that funds healthcare projects in rural Kenya. But today, I'm here as a mom to Zoe, who's 4.5, and Vivian, who's 2. I'm here today to express my unwavering support of the proposed planning code amendments for childcare facilities in San Francisco. When I returned to work after the birth of my first daughter, we were fortunate to find Next Kids in Potrero Hill, a co-working space with on-site childcare. The setup there enabled me to return to a job I loved and needed financially, which was also important for my mental health, especially as someone who struggled with postpartum depression. It also allowed me to visit my girls throughout the day as we pleased. Our bond grew strong, and they were both given a wonderful foundation at an early age, in large part because of this. The teachers, support staff, and other parents also became my village, supporting me and my family during tough times, celebrating the good, and perhaps most importantly, making me feel less isolated and overwhelmed. My experience as a first-time parent was normalized. Sadly, in January 2016, Next Space closed, in part because they could no longer afford the $40,000 per month rent, but in larger part because they could never fill all of the childcare spots because it wasn't licensed. And it wasn't licensed because they didn't have any adjacent outdoor space, despite taking twice daily trips to one of 4 local parks. In the end, we all lost. According to the 2015 child care portfolio in California, in 2014, there were only enough slots in licensed child care facilities for less than 15% of children aged 0 to 5 in San Francisco. Parents in this city are scrambling to find childcare for their children and often sacrifice quality of care because there are so few options. A major impediment to expanding childcare access is restrictive state and local land use regulations. The proposed changes will make it much easier to provide childcare spaces in all of our neighborhoods and available spaces from single-family home districts to residential.
Thanks very much. Any other members of the public who wish to speak or comment on item number 3? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Yee?
Sure, thank you. First of all, again, Ms. Nicolopoulos, sorry. Thanks for reminding me that Commissioner Christine Johnson was very active in thinking of all these issues, and want to give her some credit. Credit for her energy in this. We're talking about the shortage now, and there is truly a shortage of childcare slots. And we're looking at a population growth in the next decade or so that's pretty much going to make it even worse if we don't start acting on these issues. And it's going to add to the pressure of actually having families move out of San Francisco. So I'm really happy to say that in general, people on the Board of Supervisors, supervisors on the board have been very supportive of these issues and understand these issues, and something that we're really fortunate to have. This is, we've done some things in the last few years around childcare issues, some on facilities and so forth. Well, this is only going to be one of a series of things that we're hoping to accomplish in the next few years. I talked to the planning staff recently. We're looking at how we can make it easier for people to find out how to even start a child care center, and creating some porthole? Yeah. So we're looking at those type of issues in the near future. So today we're on this piece of legislation. It's a really important piece because it makes it a lot easier for one to actually create a center of facilities in the neighborhoods that need them. And the open space issue is highly crucial. Without this piece, developers will continue to not support facilities on the development. And I think this is the incentive piece that we need for them. And they're supportive of this issue also. So today I ask that the Land Use Committee support this piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. I just want to thank you for sponsoring this item and for your continued dedication to this topic, and would like to be added as a co-sponsor. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Yee, Planning Department staff, and Commissioner Johnson for initiating this really important work. And so I'll make a motion to send forth this ordinance with positive recommendation to the full board.
Okay, thank you. Motion by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 4?
Yes, item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to revise the amount of the inclusionary affordable housing fee and the on-site and off-site affordable housing alternatives and other inclusionary housing requirements to require minimum dwelling unit mix in most residential districts and affirming the planning department's determination under CEQA.
Okay, thank you. This item was sponsored by Supervisors Kim and Peskin, so I'll turn over to Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, Supervisor Tang. Insofar as I've been advised that any remaining amendments can be made tomorrow at the full board, I would request, subject to public comment, that we file this item.
Okie dokie. With that, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 4? Oh, we have our planning staff here. Anne-Marie?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Planning Commission, I would just like to thank again the board for your work on the inclusionary ordinance. This is a very important ordinance, and the Commission appreciates you considering their advice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Apologize for not recognizing you first, Ms. Rogers. Anybody else wish to now? We'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 4? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. So there's a motion by Supervisor Peskin to file his item. Can we take that without objection? Okay, so moved. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 5?
Yes, item number 5 is an ordinance amending the police code to prohibit the assembly, disassembly, sale, offer for sale, distribution, or offer of distribution on public property or public right-of-ways of bicycles and bicycle parts under certain conditions with certain exceptions, and authorize the police department to seize bicycles and bicycle parts following violations of this prohibition, and require SFPD to return seized items to their rightful owners without charging any fees.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. So, colleagues, this item was sponsored by Supervisor Sheehy, who I believe was intending to join us but is not here. So why don't we go into recess for 2 minutes? We'll see if we can locate him, and we'll be right back. Huh? Okay, welcome back to our Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, July 10th, 2017. We are coming back from a recess. Item number 5 has been called. This item is sponsored by Supervisor Jeff Sheehy, who is now joining us in committee. So, Supervisor Sheehy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. I'm Supervisor Jeff Sheehy, and I represent District 8, which includes the Castro, parts of the Mission, Noe Valley, DuBose Triangle, and Glen Park. When I was appointed a few months ago, I started with the focus on neighborhood crime and making sure our communities were safer due to our work here on the Board of Supervisors. Many neighbors reported home invasions or hot prowls where a criminal would enter their home or garage and make off with valuable property. Often this property included bicycles, which were then resold on the street. After a few meetings and Mission Station and talking to neighbors, it became clear to me that we need new tools to address bike theft in our city, particularly when those bicycles are sold in open-air chop shops on city streets. We can do better. And for me, this one is personal. I started in San Francisco as a bike messenger, and I know that if you rely on your bicycle for daily transportation, its theft would make a huge difference in your ability to get to work or actually perform the basics of your job. My colleagues know that I rely on data, so I prepared a PowerPoint that I wanted to share, and I would ask SF TV to go to the slides. And so first of all, we have to define what a chop shop actually looks like. Based on discussions with the city attorney and police department, we came up with the definition of 5 or more bikes, a frame with gear cables or bike cables cut, 3 or more bicycles with missing parts or more bicycle parts. The chop shop would have to be located on any street, sidewalk, passageway, or any other right-of-way on public property. Next slide, please. A chop shop would not include someone operating with a valid business license, an owner who is present during the repair of a single bicycle or bicycle part, items offered at a garage or yard sale, or items used in connection with a nonprofit event. Today, we have a lot of different ways of dealing with this issue. Let me share some examples. Here we have an example on Montgomery and Pine. It was called into 311, reported as abandoned, and reported to Recology. Next slide. Here in the Dolores Park median, we have a call to Public Works since it's on public property. Next slide. Here at 17th and Harrison, we have a situation referred to our police department. Clearly what we're doing isn't working, and we could use some standardization so when a member of the public calls, they know who will respond and what could happen. Next slide. Here we have call volume by location. Last year, there were more than 700 calls to 311, and here's their citywide distribution. Next slide. By station, you can see 60% are in the Mission Station, including the Castro and Mission neighborhoods, among others. 26% are in Southern Station, which is generally the South of Market neighborhood. Here you can see the call volume by station. Here's the process proposed in the legislation before us today. SFPD would issue an administrative citation with no fine and with no criminal penalty. A rightful owner could reclaim property by proving it's theirs. A bill of sale, serial number, or sworn affidavit would be required. I repeat, no monetary penalty would be included. There would be a right of appeal, which must be filed within 15 days. With that, I would urge your approval of this legislation and recommendation to the full board after we hear public comment.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Sheehy. Colleagues, any questions or comments before we head into public comment? Seeing none, we'll open this up to public comment. Everyone will have 2 minutes. Please step on forward. As soon as the person in front of you is done, hop on up and we'll get through it. Welcome.
Hello, I would like to submit these letters to the committee, if I could approach. Hello, my name is Dayton Andrews. I'm the human rights organizer of the Coalition on Homelessness, and I'm here today to implore that you reject this bill today. This ordinance, the situation, the chop shop that was defined in this previous presentation, that's the average bicycle owner's garage. It's not unusual for people to have multiple accessories, multiple bicycles, for a variety of different reasons. People like to accessorize their bikes, they like to improve them, they like to personalize them. And this bill wrongfully criminalizes unhoused people for owning bicycles. It criminalizes them for recycling bicycles. It criminalizes them for owning more than one, for owning several components. This is a very complex issue, but simply criminalizing recycling of bicycles is not the way to do it. We have in many cases where this is their only means of transportation, and now people are facing even further criminalization of that. So I would like to implore you today to please look at the facts. It is more, we understand this is a very visible issue. It is very visible when we see bicycles in the encampments, but criminalizing people for recycling is not the correct way to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Sophia Laskani from the Coalition on Homelessness. The upsurge in bike theft is a complex issue which involves organized, disparate criminal elements. While stolen bikes may be present within a given encampment of unhoused people, it is a drop in the bucket of organized crime, and it would unfairly target all homeless people who engage in bike recycling without reducing theft.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Jamie Undun. I'm with the Coalition on Homelessness. The loss of property is a daily issue for unhoused people. Photos, documents, and identification are constantly lost in the churn between the streets, service providers, and state agencies. It is unreasonable to expect unhoused people to maintain receipts or serial numbers of past purchases. In addition, homeless people often receive donations, find scrap parts in various locations, and buy used parts. Therefore, we feel that it is very likely that homeless people will be unjustly cited, burdened with impound fees, and have to go through an arduous process of regaining their rightful property. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name's Simon Ma. I'm currently a medical student at UCSF, and I'm currently working at the Tenderloin, and a lot of the patients and clients we see are predominantly homeless. So I just want to add a health-based perspective to this bill. So over 60% of the unhoused population suffer from one or more disabling conditions, including mental health issues that impact their functioning. This chop shop ordinance would allow police to confiscate property and force the owners to retrieve it themselves and pay the impound fees. And you can imagine that something like this would create an undue burden for poor, elderly, and disabled people. So just wanted to add that perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Dale Smith. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I volunteer with the Coalition on Homelessness. I personally do not support this bill. As it stands, this bill is going to further criminalize some of the most vulnerable individuals within our communities. It can and will target individuals who have had their property subject to theft and destruction, violating their rights, which in turn will only harm said individuals at a time where they're experiencing extreme marginalization from society. It doesn't do anything to effectively combat bike theft and legitimate chop shops. It will unfairly target the unhoused population who are already subject to frequent harassment, citations, property theft, and destruction at the hands of the state. I implore you to not support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Evan Owski. I live in the Inner Richmond, and I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm also a member of the SF Bicycle Coalition and an avid cyclist. I too am concerned about bike theft, and I've had my bike stolen in San Francisco, but I don't believe this bill is the right way to go about preventing bike theft. What's more likely to happen as a result of the passage of the bill is that homeless people will be further marginalized and further harassed, and they'll be held to a standard of proving the ownership of their personal property that housed people are not held to. I think there are other ways that we can go about addressing bike theft, and we can look at the supply side of things rather than look at so-called open-air shops. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
It goes without saying I oppose this bill.
We got it. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Seplak. I'm a resident of District 5, and I'm a casual cyclist. It seems self-evident to me that this bill is merely a means to further criminalize the most disadvantaged people in our city, which are the people living on our streets. It is, as we've heard, a very visible problem. Bike theft is not an imagined problem, but studies have shown that the majority of bike thefts are actually not conducted by citizens living on our streets, but by organized gangs, making use of vehicles and power tools. This bill would, as I said, further criminalize the most disadvantaged and do nothing to stop the actual problem of bike theft in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, Supervisors. Thank you. My name is Frank Giraffe. I'm a documentary film editor and a 25-year San Francisco resident living in District 8. I'm an avid bicyclist. I'm also a member of the SF Bike Coalition. I'm certainly not speaking for them today. The problem SF has always faced in my 25 years here of homelessness and people disadvantaged on the street and addressing their needs is old, and I respect the city efforts trying to address it. The problem of bike chop shops, though, is new, and I think we need some new form of addressing it. This is unlike anything I've seen in the 25 years I've lived in San Francisco, and I think we need to change our thinking as to how to solve this problem. I don't think this change will criminalize homelessness. I think it will criminalize criminals. I think the SFPD has enough experience dealing with this situation to exercise some discretion in how they apply this. Fortunately, right now, I think those gangs that are doing large-scale bike chopping are taking advantage of San Francisco's homeless population and embedding themselves in them and basically using that for cover. So I support this legislation, and I encourage you to pass it on to the full committee and do a good thing for cyclists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Jennifer Fieber. I'm political campaign director for the San Francisco Tenants Union. We're adamantly opposed to this legislation. I ride a bike. I've had 2 of them stolen in broad daylight, and most likely they were taken by professional crime rings that immediately sent them out of state. And I don't see how this law prevents that. I'm not even sure it's legal. There have been several lawsuits in cities against taking the property of homeless people, and the lawsuits argue that it violates the constitutional rights to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures and to be treated equally under the law. And this proposal is clearly not treating people equally.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Thomas. I'm a resident in the Mission District. I am in favor of the chop shop legislation, and I am not a heartless bastard. Took time off from work last week to be present at the budget hearing to advocate for additional dollars for homeless and health services. I've devoted hundreds of hours in the past year to obtaining humane and just services. Today, I'd like to set aside the us-them mentality that's created with this tired canard of criminalizing or hassling the homeless and speak some plain truths. Stealing bikes, fencing bikes, buying stolen bikes are criminal activities, often supporting a larger drug trade industry. This isn't some guy selling strawberries from the back of his truck. These aren't flower pots on the sidewalks. These are not victimless crimes. There are victims. The victims are regular San Francisco citizens and workers, those whose garages were broken into, whose bike locks weren't strong enough, who can't walk the city public places any longer. We're people who embrace a walkable, bike-friendly city. Many are victimized twice, once when the bike is stolen, twice when they no longer can walk the city streets. We often hear the sign bites. Well, this is not just another way of hassling the guy on the street and go after the real criminals. There are actual thieves, drug manufacturers, and drug dealers. Thank you. Don't squander the caring and empathy of the citizens that care and want humane services for those on the streets. Put the dollars into homeless services.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, committee members. Again, my name is Lena O'Malley. I'm here as a representative of Compass Family Services as well as a resident of District 7. Compass Family Services would like to inform you of our opposition to this proposed legislation. From our understanding, it would prohibit the taking apart or rebuilding of bikes, the simple possession of bike parts, or selling the bike parts in public spaces. And we believe that the families and children that we serve would be negatively impacted by this legislation. Though the ordinance attempts to address the troubling issue of bicycle theft, we think the inevitable effect would be to magnify the over-policing and over-criminalization of those who live outdoors and own multiple bikes and/or parts. And we believe the ordinance would also unfairly label many of our already vulnerable populations as bike thieves while failing to prove that such a policy would in fact reduce bike theft. Much like stop and frisk, we believe it assumes guilt without cause and relies on profiling. So we're concerned about bike theft, but we don't believe that this kind of policy would be a good deterrent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruskin Landreth, and I'm from District 5. I'm a member of the Bicycle Coalition and an avid cyclist. Thankfully, I've never had a bike stolen, but I represent a lot of people here who couldn't be here who have. And where I believe this proposed ordinance sits is it sits where, exactly like the previous speaker said, it criminalizes criminals. These chop shops aren't just recycling ventures. They are economic dynamos for communities that are themselves in need of homeless services and drug rehab services. And instead, we have drug dealers using the bikes themselves as a currency, a means to influence people, to manipulate people. And it's really unfortunate for all involved. For those that do have their bikes stolen, many times they aren't these carbon fiber Tour de France bikes. They're the types of bikes that people use to get to and from work, to go to the grocery store, to see family and friends, to maintain relationships. And once you pull that out of someone's life, it dramatically destroys their life. A lot of people can't just go and buy another bike. They can't just go and, I don't know, jump on the bus. Maybe they put all their money into their bike to get to family and friends that aren't on a Muni line. So having this all over the city, rampant, unabated theft by those criminal elements, not the homeless people that truly need the bikes, that get support through organizations that are support through Yellow Bike Project and other things like that. This targets the criminals who are using bike chop shops as a means to hurt all involved, the homeless, those that get to from work, and those just trying to have a good time back around this beautiful city. Thank you for presenting this ordinance.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi there, I'm Darby Thomas. I'm the co-chair of the San Francisco Democratic Socialists of America. I've lived in District 6 for 4 years, and I've been a bicycle commuter for all of them, and I do not support this legislation. I know that I wouldn't pass the test of ownership simply because I'm too lazy to register my bicycle and keep papers on my person at all times, and expecting someone who's struggling on the street with fewer resources to do the same is ridiculous. And I know that this bill will do nothing to protect my bicycle. I know this will only open up people who are struggling on the street to more harassment should this bill pass. I know that my garage will still be broken into, my seat on my bicycle will still be removed, and all we'll get out of this is criminalizing folks that are homeless.
Great. Hello, good afternoon, Chairman Farrell, supervisors. My name is Brian Wiedenmeyer. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I hope you all received a letter that I sent out on Friday afternoon regarding this proposed ordinance. I want to highlight a few things that have been said here in public comment, and the first is that bicycle theft is a real problem in the city and county of San Francisco. It is one with victims, as it has been stated. In fact, we know that bike theft, or the fear of theft, is the number 2 reason more people do not ride bicycles in our city after safety. So this is a real problem, and it requires real solutions. I'm happy to hear this is being discussed in this chamber. I did make some suggestions in that letter about things that this bill could address that would allow us to enthusiastically support it. So there was a budget and legislative analyst memo that went to Supervisor Marr in 2013 looking at this problem that I think had a range of very reasonable suggestions that could look at tackling the problem of bike theft, including data, including a bicycle theft task force within SFPD that would focus on the selling, the buying and reselling of stolen bicycles. I think it's a shame that as a problem as big as bike theft that I think all of the speakers here in public comment recognize is a problem, doesn't have a unified voice in this room, at least, in support of a solution. If this legislation could be amended to target those that buy and resell stolen property, I think it's an ordinance that the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition could enthusiastically support. Right now, we're not there yet. So thank you for your time and attention to this very real problem, and I look forward to working with this board towards real solutions.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Daniel Bergerac. I'm a resident and small business owner in the Castro. I'm also the president of Castro Merchants. I am not speaking on behalf of the Castro Merchants this afternoon. Small businesses are the vitality of our neighborhoods. Small businesses in San Francisco are under attack by high rents, Amazon, regulations, disappearing parking, and a host of other issues I'm sure you hear from your constituents about daily. As a small business owner, I'm very aware of all these regulations and fees and taxes to do business here in San Francisco. By allowing illegal businesses to operate in San Francisco, you're sending a real clear message to all business owners in the city. And that message is, sucker! Go ahead, open up businesses on our public right-of-ways. Don't pay rent, don't pay taxes, don't pay fees. Don't worry about the environment. Leave your toxic waste in the gutter to drain into our bay. Don't operate under accepted business practices of having receipts or invoices for your merchandise. We'll just look the other way. The city must give our police the tools necessary to combat these illegal operations. I urge you to approve this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Fred Winograd. I live in the Castro, and Supervisor Sheehy is my supervisor. I absolutely support this legislation, not to stop bike theft, but to stop what the gentleman just talked about. People using the streets to vend anything without a license it's just beyond belief that someone would support legislation that wouldn't allow this. What I mean is that in the last year, walking the streets of my neighborhood, tripping over bicycle parts, watching the police pull people away from obstructing the sidewalk, it's unbelievable. And what's left is the residue of the chains and the oil and whatever. It's just a horrible mess. So this is not to solve the world's problems, but I think it definitely solves the one that's important to me, is the legal activity that's allowed on what called the sidewalks, not the side store. This is a good thing. It is not impinging on the homeless. It's impinging on those who obstruct and just desecrate our sidewalks. So I fully support the legislation and hope that at least you pass this up to the full supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Nancy Hammer. I live in the Castro Mission area, and I thoroughly support Sheehy's legislation for Chop Shop, the changes in the law. I have a studio up in Potrero, so I have the opportunity to see different parts of the city, what's going on a daily basis, and very often, if not, the chop shops that I've been seeing are not only in the right-of-way on the sidewalks, but into the road on side streets. And I've also seen disabled people and seniors who are not able to use the sidewalks because they're totally cluttered up, and they're harassed for just wanting to pass by. It's very difficult for seniors and handicap. I think this should be passed, vigorously passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Post. I'm a resident of District 2. I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America San Francisco chapter. Apologies for reading off the phone so I don't miss my points here, but I understand the impulse of this legislation. I've had my bike stolen. I had a nice road bike stolen out front of the DeYoung. It sucked. I saw it on the streets a few days later, reconfigured with some other parts. That also sucked because I hadn't thought to write down the serial number or keep receipts for the years before that I'd bought in the bike. So there wasn't really much I could do about it. But I think that points out a problem. Luckily I have a house, I have a garage where I've stored other bikes, and I'm able to cobble together a commuter bike from some parts. So I have loose parts, but they're in my garage because I have a house. For people who are homeless, I don't know what they would do. And I'd also like to echo the comments that people have made about this being a version of a stop and frisk policy. I think this policy, if it was put into effect, will probably sweep up bike thieves, but it also is going to disproportionately sweep up or result in the harassment of low-income people, people who are non-white, people who are homeless. There are better ways to combat this problem and other unregulated vending, as people have talked about it, than spending precious police resources on it. Finally, I want to urge you all to consider the recent findings of the Fines and Fees Task Force. Included in this legislation is a complicated procedure to recoup impound fees, but I don't know how many people are going to be able to navigate it. And the Fines and Fees Task Force really points out that even just these petty fines and fees really do impact people, disproportionately low-income people, in their day-to-day lives. So I do oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Griffin Jones. I'm with the DSA, and I also grew up the street in District 5 and have been working with the homeless since I was in second grade with Catholic Charities. And I don't support this legislation. I urge you guys to vote against it. It's not the reason homeless people are desecrating the sidewalk. It's not because they're tax evading, people too lazy to get a business license. I think we all know that. And I think this is just another way for the city to criminalize poverty. And it seems pretty gross. So thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, supervisors. My name is Amy Farrow-Weiss. I'm the founder and director of the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge. And the focus of our organization is on the encampment and shelter shortage crisis that we are going to be enduring and have endured for many years, decades, and we will be enduring over the years to come. And so the idea is that when we come up with policy about encampments during the shelter shortage crisis, we have to figure out ways that are increasing accountability both ways, so that we're supporting basic livability needs for the encampment residents, but there also have to be reasonable agreements. And this is part, perhaps, of a discussion about how we co-create those reasonable agreements while organizing with encampment residents. But targeting this particular piece without looking at it holistically is a problem. And I've been working with larger encampments, and most of them have, at least a third of the people there have bike skills. And so the work that I'm doing holistically is to see how do we take these existing skills and transfer them into something that will be beneficial to this person's transition as well as to the community. So Supervisor Sheehy, I invited you. You might have seen this email, didn't respond, but on Easter Sunday at the Yellow Bike Project, we had an event where 3 bikes rose again from the Yellow Bike Project in the Tenderloin by having encampment residents work together to rebuild them. And so what I would really suggest is that we take this back to the drawing board. Supervisor Sheehy, you come out with the Coalition on Homelessness, St. Francis Challenge, DSA, and we go and talk to the people in the encampments and find out how they would like to transition their skills and come up with reasonable agreements together. Because the only way we're going to heal the city and this encampment crisis is to have common sense approaches that actually organize together with encampment residents. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
James White, and I'm a homeless individual who is working with Amy. I live in one of the structures that she sponsors, and I don't think this legislation has been well thought out, based upon when you pass an encampment and you see bike parts and all that. It's not. I think that's transparency, if anything else. It may be in a way, it may be an eyesore to the community, and it could be more. People could be like, I don't support blocking sidewalks. I don't support stolen bikes. I don't support buying stolen parts and all that. But the majority of people that I know from my side of the fence, they recycle bike parts. You don't roll up on no campsite and see carbon fibers, bikes, and all that. You don't. They're not that organized. It's just another means to be able to try to find a better way to live other than being on the streets. And it's like a means of survival, and it's not predominantly based upon taking someone else's personal property and you know, just I just don't support it, man. It's just like I'm out there with it, and I know the majority of people I know, and I've been out on the street for a while, and the majority of people I know isn't responsible for all the bike theft that's taking place in San Francisco.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer Friedenbach, Director of the Coalition on Homelessness. We live in a world where implicit and explicit bias against people based on their race, their socioeconomic status, their housing status is rampant. Yes, San Franciscans walk by homeless people and oftentimes wrongly assume that their property must be stolen, not understanding that bicycle recycling is a legitimate economic venture for many destitute people who don't have access to traditional jobs. But not understanding doesn't make it right. This legislation codifies that bias by allowing the police to confiscate bicycle property without probable cause, simply because they have more than a handful of bike parts or a handful of bikes. And combined with the unfortunate being of living outside. They must go through a process under this legislation to get this back, including the paying of impound fees, including going to locations that might be difficult for them to access. For me, I have about 5 bikes in my garage, one for each of my family members and one extra. Obviously, we're really concerned about theft. That's how I get to work every day. That's how my kids get to school. But we have an extra bike right now that is unusable. We won't be able to sell it on Craigslist. I've probably done this a half a dozen times before because we buy cheap, crappy bikes. Eventually, they're unrideable. We put them out with the hope that they're going to be taken apart, recycled, rebuilt, and resold, which is wonderful. If I was homeless, I would have my property confiscated under this law, simply because I was poor. This bill is not going to decrease bike theft, but it's just going to confiscate the property without probable cause for poor people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name's Kelly Cutler. I'm a human rights organizer with the Coalition on Homelessness. And this proposed legislation authorizes the police to impound property without probable cause that criminal activity has occurred. Thus, this legislation violates the Fourth Amendment. Under People v. Williams, it's in your packet. You can find the details there. So in California, law presumes that a person who possesses an item is its rightful owner, and this legislation would result in the frequent confiscation of property from rightful owners simply because they are destitute and therefore presumed to be thieves. We don't oppose policy that, regarding bike theft. We just oppose bad policy regarding bike theft, and so we urge you to oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Justin Heitch, and I fully oppose this legislation because it gives the police the right to assume anyone is a thief, and it's too much power. They already abuse their power. This would allow police the authority to legally steal. I know bike theft is a problem, but this potential ordinance is not the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Sharon Noel. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator with the Homeless Youth Alliance. I'm also on the board of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, and we both oppose this ordinance fully. Our youth, our homeless youth in San Francisco, constantly feel targeted and stigmatized as it is, just trying to survive day to day, much less without having to add the constant stress of the very real possibility of having their property stolen simply because they are the ones that own it and their economic status. This ordinance would do nothing but further marginalize our homeless community and at the same time do nothing to actually address bike theft, which is already illegal. So I just wanted to say that we fully are opposed to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I'm Bob Planthold,
And I came to suggest that there's other factors that aren't being mentioned, that aren't considered, that can be relevant. What hasn't been addressed is the difficulty, the hazards, the risks of when the sidewalks are so fully occupied that it's difficult, cumbersome, possibly hazardous to pass by. And I'll give you examples. Along 16th Street at Folsom, there's often several people lined up there, but that's also the bus stop. And that's the bus stop for those who go to or come from the Mission Neighborhood Health Center, where a lot of families go to have their kids immunized, have well baby checkups, sick kid checkups. Even worse, on the other side, next to the health center, there's a bus stop at Shotwell. Sometimes people set up in that bus shelter to do their bicycle work. There's another situation on inbound Mission at DuBose. It's a triangular bus stop, and there again, people will set up there or across the street at the freeway exit ramp. But that's also where people will come from the planning department, from building inspection, even from the human services agency to board a bus. I'm suggesting that the hazards, the risks of people who are vulnerable, pushing a baby in a stroller accompanied by a toddler, as I had to do for years. Anybody who's using a dog as a company for their getting by because they can't see, people in scooters, any number of people are going to have difficulties when the people who use these bike chop shops on the street congregate to buy, to negotiate, to repair, to work. I think this is an approach that ought to be considered just to reduce the chances, the ability of people to get by. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Sam, and I've lived in San Francisco for the past 22 years of my life. I just wanted to urge you to oppose this legislation. I'm really concerned because it will only criminalize people of color, poor people, and homeless people. Homeless people already have their property confiscated on a daily basis, and bikes are often homeless people's only means of transportation. And if those were taken away, they would really experience extreme hardship without their bikes. Another thing is that there is already a law that makes it illegal to obstruct the sidewalk, so we don't really need another law like this. And this law would also unfairly target homeless people. So again, I would really urge you to oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. If any other members of the public wish to speak, please feel free to line up, and everyone will have 2 minutes again. Come on up, sir.
All right, cool. I was wondering how I would tell my time, but you guys make it easy for me. So thank you. My name is Brandon Alvarado. Thank you for giving me a reason to come all the way up here just for this meeting from San Jose. I'm a student at San Jose State University. I've been homeless for 2.5 months, and I've lived out of my car. I'm the vice chair of San Jose's Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I started getting into bicycle advocacy because of one single thing, and that was because I almost had my bike stolen, like you've experienced before. I think that I'm in complete support of what this bill intends to solve, and I came up here hoping to say that I support it, but I would like to see a bill that maybe helps meet the needs of other people within your local community. It does sound like a lot of people have been missing the details who are opposed to this bill, which are some things that I really love about the legislation that you guys have wrote, such as the fact that, and I also work in bike retail sales and have for 5 years, so I know for a fact that most people don't keep their receipts and know what their serial number is. So I think that's great that you guys offer an option where people can describe their bikes and sign an affidavit, because that'll address that. I do think that any of the decisions you guys make, or a lot of the decisions you guys make, aren't easy ones and will leave some people unhappy and opposed. But I imagine that you guys look at the bigger picture of this, and it sounds like a lot of other people have addressed issues that this city has strong values that they stand behind. I never even would have thought about the sustainable and environmental impact that these greases and hazmats have on your streets. The public safety, for people who may need wheelchair access, and the transportation issues, because I'm all about more people riding bikes, but if more people are fearing bike theft, then they're not going to ride. So I'd love to see this bill work to help all groups of the community. I also would love to be a part of the process and someday write you an email and hopefully get a response to understand how we can maybe.
Thanks very much. Any other members of the public wish to speak on item number 5? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and I want to acknowledge Supervisor Sheehy. This has definitely been a vexing problem, both as it relates to bicycle theft as well as the situations on some sidewalks. And I think we've heard a diverse set of opinions today. I do have some concerns, and I do want to associate myself with the words of the Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition, Brian Wiedenmeyer. But before getting into the details, I wanted to really start with the financial impacts of the legislation, and wanted to hear from the police department insofar as this would provide some new roles for them to play as to whether or not, A, they have a facility for storing the bicycles, B, whether they have sufficient personnel, C, insofar as we are about to vote on a budget for the police department and all of our other departments, whether or not the cost impacts of the legislation have been analyzed, and whether the police department thinks that they can implement the legislation. So I'd love to hear if there's a representative from the PD here. I guess there is not. The second issue, and I say this as somebody who's been on and off the board for getting on to 20 years, is kind of a fundamental test that I do when I look at legislation, which is there are many things that happen in our society that we don't like and we want to, behaviors we want to change, situations that we wish to change. And the question is, do we have the political will and do we have the actual enforcement tools on our books? And oftentimes, particularly in and around issues of homelessness, I find that many of those laws are actually on the books, but we don't have the will to enforce them. We've passed laws about sidewalk obstruction. There are laws about vending on the streets. I mean, technically, it's illegal for you to have a yard sale on the sidewalk. That's not provided for under the code. We have laws about hazardous materials that we can enforce if we chose. So all of these laws are on the books, and I know it feels good to pass a piece of legislation to deal with an issue, and without any offense to the chair of this committee, relative to the legislation that was on the ballot having to deal with tent encampments. I mean, it felt good for some people to vote for it, but I don't think it's lessened the number of tent encampments on our streets. So, but I do think that there is and has been and continues to be a serious problem with bicycle theft. None of us can say any different. And to that end, and I was actually going to bring up the Budget and Legislative Analyst Report that Supervisor Marr commissioned in 2013 that actually came up with an array of options for consideration by the Board of Supervisors to address the issue of bicycle theft. And many of them have never been implemented or have been abandoned. And we've seen results, positive results, in other cities relative to the creation of bicycle theft units in their departments, to increasing bicycle theft education, to bike baiting operations throughout the city. And I'd also like to talk to the PD about what level of commitment and what level of funding they're devoting to that. And then finally, I do, fundamentally have concerns about the presumption of guilt, the presumption of bike theft that the legislation creates. And I also have serious concerns about a phenomenon that San Francisco has historically shunned while other municipalities have embraced it, which is the notion of civil asset forfeiture. Which is something that we have to, I think, be very, very cautious about. And then finally, and this is not just about housed and unhoused individuals, but this legislation only deals with this phenomenon as an outside phenomenon, not as an inside phenomenon. So if you've got a chop shop in somebody's garage or on an open piece of property, and I see this all the time as well. They're not on the sidewalk, but they're on the other side of the fence. This legislation doesn't address that. Not anecdotally, I've had conversations with the police because I too am interested in trying to seriously address the issue of bicycle theft, and I was told by the PD last year that what we heard today, which is that the majority of the bicycle theft that happens in San Francisco is done by organized elements. They use vans. Many of the bicycles are actually taken out of the city and taken down to the South Bay. This is what I heard from the PD. So, but I think first and foremost, it's really important for us. I don't want to vote for a law until I hear from the police department that, yes, this is a law that not only would help them, but that they can afford. That, I mean, when I read things like require the SFPD to return seized items to their rightful owners without charging any fees, that means that my cops are not going to be taking A calls and B calls because they're going to be doing this without any compensation to the police department. And so that's one of the things that we have to weigh, particularly as we are a week away from voting for the budget. So without talking to the cops, I'd be reticent to vote on this today.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. One question I had for the sponsor of the legislation was just regarding the definition for what would constitute a chop shop. So I noticed that there was talk about there being 5 or more bicycles, and I'm just wondering how we arrived at that number.
Supervisor Shi.
In talking with the police officer where this problem was endemic, the suggestion was 5 or more. We don't want to be taking people's personal possessions. If you have 5, it's pretty clear that there's a substantial number of bicycles you have. It's not just the 1 or 2 you may be using for yourself. So we wanted to err on the side of caution and not try to limit this to the degree where we were getting people's personal property.
Thank you. And, in listening to the public comment that was stated, I mean, I know there was a lot of talk about, this legislation is criminalizing the homeless and so forth. And I'll just say that that is certainly not my intention and the way I would read this legislation. In fact, it sounds that based on this legislation, the SFPD would issue administrative citations, so there would actually be no criminal penalty. So that's something that I think is, again, we're not trying to criminalize homeless individuals. We're trying to actually correct a situation for where there are sales of stolen bicycles that are taking place on the public right-of-way, and that's something that I would like to also see addressed. And so I think I just wanted to, it's not really a question, but I think, again, hearing from the public comment, really just ensure that we're all on the same page here, which is that a chop shop would have, 5 or more bicycles, as Supervisor Sheehy said, a bicycle frame with the gear cables or brake cables cut, 3 or more bicycles with missing parts, and 5 or more bicycle parts. So I think based on that definition, it's very clear that we're not trying to criminalize people who may have, say, maybe you're homeless and you might have a couple of bikes for maybe you and, let's say, you have someone else in your family who also rides a bicycle. The limit is, or the threshold is 5. One of the public commenters mentioned that you don't necessarily have to have a receipt, and I read that in the legislation as well, is that you could actually demonstrate your ownership if you either sign an affidavit or you could show pictures even, evidence that you are actually the lawful owner, and so forth. And if you were the owner who was present at the, let's just say it's a garage sale or even you're on a sidewalk, I believe that that would not constitute a violation here of this law. So, I mean, in my opinion, when I'm reading this legislation, I see it as trying to address an issue and not trying to criminalize individuals who have to live on the street and have no choice. So, and when you just look at the map as to where this is occurring, I mean,
that's also very interesting that it's concentrated in one particular neighborhood in San Francisco. So, I mean, today I'm comfortable with supporting this legislation because that's where my intent is coming from, and I don't see, I'd really love to see how this legislation would go and if there might be some tweaks that may be needed down the line. But again, my intent is not to criminalize homeless individuals with this.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Sheehy.
A couple of points through the chair. Harvey Rose has already stated that this does not have a fiscal impact, so that's been analyzed and looked at. We had not seen the letter from the Bike Coalition, so we look forward to working with them and seeing what their ideas are and seeing what we can do to bring them on board. But again, to reiterate what's been said, this is not about criminalizing people, but dealing with a real issue. And as you've heard from people in my neighborhood, where if you look at the map, a lot of this is happening, our sidewalks are obstructed. Business is being done on the streets. It's not a legal business, and it does, as my friend Daniel Bergerac mentioned, it does send a real signal to people who are trying to do the right thing in the way that they operate their businesses, that they are suckers. And it's not about feeling good. It's about trying to take some steps to do something about obvious criminal activity where, as someone mentioned, this is part of a whole enterprise. The bikes, in a lot of ways, I think the people who are working on the bikes, who are in receipt of these stolen parts and then taking them apart, putting them back together, or trading them for drugs. And we have to ask ourselves, is that okay? To have our kids walk down the streets with us and see bikes that have been, many of them have been stolen, being taken apart, reassembled, and then traded for drugs, and then to see people put needles in their arms. I mean, there seems to be two standards in this city. And I don't think people, I think we need to do so much more to address homelessness, but to completely say that we have no laws, that you can do whatever you want on our streets, that's not something I can support.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Peskin, are you back?
So at the risk of sounding tough on crime, I think people who steal bikes should be busted, and they shouldn't get an administrative penalty. They should be booked and charged. Bike theft is a crime, and people should be charged with it. Those laws are on our books. If you're obstructing a sidewalk, those laws are on our books. If you're putting hazardous materials on our sidewalks, those laws are on our books. Relative, with all due respect to Supervisor Sheehy, to drug use and the financial means that people procure drugs with, drugs are procured with money, drugs are procured with all sorts of things. I mean, if this is a war on drugs, then this is a different thing. I thought this was a war on bicycle theft, and I would like to declare war on bicycle theft. But if we're going to do that and the cops think that somebody's stolen a bike, well, by golly, arrest that person, and the DA should charge them, and that is what our criminal statutes already hold. But that gets to the issue of whether or not the police have the will and the desire to do it. And whether Harvey Rose says there's a fiscal impact or not, it'd be interesting to have Mr. Rose or one of his staff here. It's still a question, and it's a valid question, and as I proved during the budget process, Mr. Rose is not always right. He makes mistakes, as do I. But is there a facility for storing these bicycles? Is there staff to do it? Is there a lost amount of productivity that police who would be assigned to this in terms of returning bikes for free, et cetera? Is there some lost opportunity as to what they would otherwise be working on? These are, I think, legitimate questions that we should be asking the cops. Without the cops here, like I said, I would be hard-pressed to vote for this today.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. I'll comment on a few things. First of all, I appreciate the dialogue here and the people that came out and public comment on both sides of this issue. Raised some interesting points. A few things specifically. First of all, I completely reject the notion that this legislation is quote-unquote criminalizing homelessness. I have seen this knee-jerk reaction from the Coalition on Homelessness since I've been in office that anything that they don't like, they consider to be criminalizing homelessness. There's no criminal penalty. There's no financial penalty here. I completely disagree with that comment and that sentiment. And I've seen it time and time again, and quite frankly, it's abhorrent. And I appreciate the dialogue and the disagreement here amongst us and colleagues. To Supervisor Peskin's comments, first of all, regarding Prop Q from last year, agreed there's too many tents still in the city of San Francisco, but I would also suggest is the volume of tent growth in surrounding jurisdictions has grown dramatically while the city of San Francisco has stayed stagnant. And sometimes lack of growth is actually a victory compared to what we see in other jurisdictions. And I don't think that we can sit here as legislators and say unless enforcement is fully worked out beforehand, when we have laws in front of us, we should be rejecting them or postponing them. I think there's time to work on that, and I do trust Supervisor Sheehy to do that. And in particular, given that this is an issue facing his district and the constituents that he represents, I think more than anyone, I want to very much support what he is doing, and I very much have seen the need for it in the Castro and some of the other neighborhoods that Supervisor Sheehy does represent. So again, I appreciate the debate around this, but this is legislation that will be supporting today. Supervisor Tang, is that you still up on the mic? If not, could entertain a motion, and I imagine we need a roll call vote on that.
Okay, I'll make a motion to send forth this item to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang. Could we have a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
On the motion to send the matter forward as recommended, Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Nope.
Peskin, no. Chair Farrell?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes with Supervisor Peskin in dissent.
Okay, motion passes. Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us today?
There's no further business.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.